Okay? He asked her, looking as surprised and embarrassed as she felt. She nodded and released her grip. Sorry. All right, said Captain Brock. We spotted a dock. We're doing a circle. The helicopter tilted over, and Petra now stared straight down on a rocky shoreline. She'd figured if this didn't make her puke, nothing would. A single boat was tied up at a skinny wooden dock. I think that's Dad's, Anaya shouted. Proceed northwest, Brock told the pilots through his headset. We are looking for a small lake, with an island in the middle. Petra stared down at a steep, rock-strewn slope. Black grass soared up everywhere. There was open ground. She spotted a bony goat standing on a boulder. Then they were over thick forest. In the treetops, she caught sight of dark vines, a quick flash of berries. I'm not seeing anything, Jolie shouted. Petra caught the worry lines in Anaya's forehead. Thought you said you knew this place, Brock said. He didn't sound charming anymore. He sounded testy. I do. It's sort of bean-shaped. I've seen pictures. You said you've been there. It was a while ago. This place isn't that big. We should have seen it by now. It's here, Anaya said firmly. One more circle of the northeast, Brock told the pilots over his headset. Anaya shook her head in frustration. It should be right down here. Take us lower, Brock told the pilots over his headset. Petra's stomach jumped as they tilted and swooped. Through Anaya's open door, she gazed into dark treetops. All I'm seeing is forest, Brock said. Those aren't trees, Anaya told him. Petra blinked and stared harder. What she'd thought were branches were actually thick vines that formed a huge canopy. Her breath snagged as she saw some of them slither, growing over one another. Even from this height, she caught a faint whiff of the sleeping perfume. The lake's down there, Anaya pointed at a gap in the vines, and Petra saw a quick flash of water. The vines must have grown right over, Seth said, like they're trying to hide it. Jolie looked at him sharply. You're talking like they're intelligent. They grabbed a cell phone, Petra told her. It's like they don't want us getting that soil, Seth added. These are plants, scoffed Captain Brock. Into his headset, he said, Okay, we're over the site, hold here. He unbuckled himself and leaned way out the door. We're certainly not landing, but if we torch away some of the vines, I can rappel. I'll burn a hole, Captain, said Jolie, unzipping the bag and pulling out a flamethrower. Wait, said Seth. It might be toxic, like the black grass. We've got masks, and you are immune, yeah? I think we should turn back, said Dr. Weber. Anaya looked at her, shocked. Why? This is already more dangerous than we thought. I've never seen the vines growing so fast. And Seth's right, the pattern of growth suggests an intelligence we haven't seen before. We can't just leave her dad down there, Petra protested. Dr. Weber looked at Captain Brock. Anywhere else to land? Not on this island. If you want our man today, we need to cut a hole and bring him through. Anaya, said Dr. Weber, I know you want your father back right now, but my chief concern is keeping you three safe. If we start a fire, we might not be able to put it out. And think of the debris that might fall on your dad. We've got gas masks. Your father doesn't. Petra saw her friend struggling. On the video, he had his mouth and nose covered, Anaya said. There must be sleeping gas floating around down there. They're trying to knock him out. If he falls asleep, that's it. We can't wait any longer. Brock passed out gas masks to the pilots and Jolie. He held one out to Dr. Weber, who reluctantly took it. Try and burn as little as possible, the doctor told Jolie. Will do, the soldier replied. Take us down, 30 feet above the canopy, and hold steady. Brock instructed the pilots, his voice muffled through the mask. Nervously, Petra held on as they dropped closer to the vines. Birds fluttered away from the bright clusters of berries. 2 tendrils stretched and wound themselves around each other. Light it up, Brock commanded. Jolie shot out a thin stream of flame. The vines caught quickly, and a plume of yellowish smoke expanded toward them. The helicopter banked away skittishly. Man, that stuff burns, said Jolie. When it stops smoking, we can see if... Whoa! Petra's head jerked back and hit the wall of the helicopter, dropped. Brock staggered off balance. Hold her steady, he shouted at the cockpit. Wasn't me, the pilot called back. Petra peered out her open door. Cold electricity tingled across her skin. Some vines had snagged around the helicopter's landing strut. Look, she shouted. You've picked up a couple of stragglers, Captain Brock told the pilots. Pull up. The helicopter lurched sharply higher, but was instantly yanked back, knocking Petra against Seth. When she looked outside again, she saw more vines crawling around the landing strut. "They're dragging us down," she yelled. "Flamethrower," Brock shouted at Jolie, who tossed it to him. The captain sent a blast of fire down into the vines, and the helicopter surged forward. Petra exhaled in relief, but her breath jolted in her chest as they tipped sharply. "Still got us," the pilot shouted back. Petra felt something against her shoe and cried out when she saw the vine. It had grown across the floor of the compartment and down out the far door. "There's one inside," she said, stamping at it with her foot. Brock pulled a serious knife from his belt and started sawing. It took him several seconds to cut through, and then Petra and Seth and Anaya helped him peel it off the floor and fling it out. "We're still snagged around the struts," Jolie shouted from her open door. The helicopter slewed in a circle, even tighter and lower. Petra looked out her doorway and saw that 2 vines had grown into the engine cowling right underneath the helicopter's rotors. "That's not good," muttered Brock, as alarms bleated from the cockpit. "Brace," the pilot shouted back at them. It was all so fast. The helicopter jerked back, as if yanked from behind, then keeled over. Petra clenched her eyes and held tight. It was like a fairground ride Seth had been on once, only much, much worse. The seat restraints bit into his shoulders and chest. The rotor shrieked a rusty tune of tortured metal. Branches crackled against the sides of the helicopter, plowed through treetops. When it finally came to a brain-shuddering stop, the air was punched right out of him. He choked in a breath and started coughing. Beside him, in the tilted compartment, Petra was blinking, dazed, holding a hand to the place where they'd just knocked heads. On his other side, Anaya stared confused at the branch that jutted into the cabin. She heard someone saying his name, and it took him a moment to realize it was Dr. Weber. "Seth?" she said, looking at him in concern. "You okay?" "Yeah, you?" "Fine." She tilted her head at his right arm, and he followed her gaze. His sleeve had been shoved up, revealing the bandages on his arm. The tip of a feather poked through. Quickly, he yanked the sleeve down. He glanced anxiously at Brock and Jolie, but they were busy with other things. Up front, the helicopter pilot was slumped motionless against the crumpled controls. The co-pilot had unbuckled himself and was shaking the pilot's shoulder. "Burton, Burton!" Somehow a vine had already crawled partway across the windshield. "Do not move," Captain Brock told them all, unbuckling himself. When Seth looked out the doorway, he understood why. They were way up, and the helicopter teetered in the branches. "Barton needs a medic," the co-pilot called back to them. "Coming," said Dr. Weber, unbuckling herself. "Carefully," said Brock, as the helicopter tilted. "Jolie, you and I are going to balance this baby while the kids get off. Anaya, you good to climb into the tree? Go." Seth watched as Anaya unbuckled herself and grabbed hold of the branch. There were lots of smaller branches to hold on to, and she clambered toward the trunk. The helicopter creaked ominously. Brock and Jolie took small steps around the compartment to keep it level. "Burton's losing a lot of blood," Dr. Weber said. "His hip's crushed. We need to get him to a hospital." "We still got a radio?" Brock asked the co-pilot. "Dead." Brock swore under his breath. "Seth, go. All the way to the ground if you can, and get clear." Seth scrambled out into the tree. Anaya shifted to some lower branches to make room. Now that he was outside the helicopter, he could see how mangled it was and how tippy. Not much holding it up. From the engine cowling, flame licked up at the mangled rotors. "There's fire," Seth called back to Jolie, pointing. "Yep," she said, like this was the most normal thing in the world. "We should keep going," Seth said to Anaya, and she nodded and kept climbing down. He looked back to Petra, who had just stepped into the hatchway. Without warning, the helicopter dropped. Petra half jumped, half fell, and landed clumsily on the same branch as Seth. She started to slip off, but he seized her wrist and steadied her long enough so she could get a grip. The helicopter fell a few more feet, and Seth saw one of the mangled rotor blades come swinging toward them. He shoved Petra's head down and ducked, just as the blade sliced over their head with a rusty moan. "Geez," muttered Petra, "thanks." And then he was climbing down as fast as he could. When he glanced up, he saw the branches bending under the helicopter's massive weight. 2 black vines grew into the open door. He heard Brock shouting orders. "Dr. Weber, go. Granahan, you too. We can't leave Burton." With a terrible groan, the helicopter listed over. The flames burned higher. Seth turned his full attention to the tree, one branch after another, working his way lower. A bag of gear tumbled past him, crackling through the branches. Brock's voice again. Grantham, get out. That's an order. Something snagged my foot. Jolie, go. With a great snapping of branches, the helicopter dropped, and this time didn't stop. Seth hugged the trunk as its burning bulk fell past him with a roar. End of chapter 16.